This week, we kick off a 3-part episodic series of women who expose America's cultural pressures to abort. It's nearly impossible nowadays to read a headline or hear an abortion activist talk about it without hearing them say something to the effect of, "People of color need abortions more than any other group." What once was never said out loud is now shouted by these folks, and that message is, if you're of a different race or socioeconomic class, you need more abortions in your community. I've often wondered how this push and type of messaging impacts people in those communities. So I caught up with women across different ethnic and poverty levels to understand how this push to abort in their neighborhoods impacted their own decisions. Join me in this 3-part story series within a series as we speak to Tony, an African-American mom in Pennsylvania, who shares her personal story of abortion pressure and how she feels the Black community has always been and still is targeted by the abortion industry. From Exposed, Abortion in America, this is Under Pressure. Why are minority communities targeted for abortion?
Hello.
Hey, Tony.
Hi.
Hey, how are you?
Good. How are you, Emily?
Thank you so much for being here today. Coercion and pressure, that is so frequently deployed against girls and young women. And I think your story really typifies this because there are different levels of pressure. We spoke in the episode prior to Born Alive survivors, and that is most certainly a forced abortion attempt on their lives. But what we see across the country are girls and young women sometimes not even identifying that they have been pressured into this abortion, and then they carry that weight and guilt on themselves when in reality, a few years later, they look back and say, wow, I did not realize that there was covert coercion there. And I know you experienced that from some of the people closest to you in your lives, but it was in a more subtle way, and then eventually a stronger way from the abortion center. Can you share with me just where you were in life when you found out you were pregnant, and then what was the response of the people in your life to that teen pregnancy?
So I was a senior in high school when I got pregnant. It was about 5 or 6 months before I was going to graduate. So that's a huge transition time for a teenager and what they're looking forward to. And so my boyfriend was a year ahead of me, so he was already in college at this time. And when I found out I was pregnant, I only told 2 people, my best friend and my boyfriend. And my best friend said, "You can't keep this baby." That was the first thing that came out of her mouth. And then when I told my boyfriend, it was, "You don't want to keep it, do you?" So he was telling me without telling me that that's where he was leaning. And I had never even thought about abortion before. And at this time in my life, I was so uneducated. I didn't know about the procedures. All I knew was I don't want to be pregnant. I don't want my family to find out. And there was this pressure of, I was known as like the good one in my family, that my parents just didn't really worry about me. And so there was that subtle pressure as well. And so I think that already put me in a vulnerable position, which when I go and I share at pregnancy resource centers, banquets and things like that, I tell them how powerful it is for what they do, because they get to share truth in the midst of this girl's chaos. And I wasn't able to receive that kind of truth. Those were the only 2 voices that I heard. So when I spoke to the abortion clinic, I had to call them and make an appointment. And I thought it was very interesting years later that they mentioned to me that they were going to give me a new name. And the reason they were giving me a new name was because they had to call my house in order to remind me of my appointment. And just in case my parents answered the phone, they would say this name so that I would know it was them calling.
So they were actively telling you, or proactively telling you, that they were going to
Mm-hmm.
conceal this from your parents?
Yes.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. So years later, after I did tell my parents about this, they said that they would have never have pushed me towards abortion.
Wow.
Like, would they have been upset? Yes, because obviously this is not what you want for your child to be in this situation, but they would have still supported me. And I was believing the lie that they wouldn't have supported me, that I would have gotten in trouble and all of these things, which might have been true in the sense of like they would have been upset and everything, but we would have worked through that. And Planned Parenthood feeds into those fears, where what I'm saying is the pregnancy resource centers, they are going to say, yeah, that might be the reality, that your parents are going to be upset, but we're going to support you and help walk you through this difficult time, where they want to cover it up for you and pretend that they're your friend and that they're helping you.
I also think, just regardless of whatever organization it is, it's really striking that, you know, you had two people in your life that you told, the only two people you told,
Mm-hmm.
and you couldn't rely on them. And then
Mm-hmm.
the abortion center, the Planned Parenthood, is more than okay with being a secret confidant
Mm-hmm.
in this
Yeah.
in this action. So talk to me about what happened when you walked through the door and you actually went to the appointment.
Well, when I walked in, it was daunting, I would say. It was not clean. It was a small building. It had more girls in there than I expected. And I didn't get any counseling. You know, I've heard girls say like they kind of did like counseling, like a 5-10 minute thing to like kind of tell you what to expect. I didn't have any of that. When my name was called, it was to get an ultrasound. And when I went in to have the ultrasound, the screen was faced against the wall. And I asked if I could see the screen. And I kid you not, the nurse was so agitated by me asking that question. When she turned her head around and the look she had on her face was like, why would you even ask me that? Basically. And you know, I'm this teenager, so I'm believing whatever they say, but there's this internal battle of I don't feel comfortable here. I feel vulnerable here, but they know more than I do.
Yeah.
And I'm looking to them for safety, you know, and so
Oh, sure. There's a serious power imbalance there, not just from the minor to adult scenario, but also from patient to, you know, provider.
Right. Exactly. And I remember asking her, or she said to me first, I don't think you should see that. And I pressed her again and just said, well, I really would just like to see the screen. And so she eventually turns it around, and I couldn't really make out. Obviously, I was very early along. I was 7 weeks. I didn't know that at the time, but I was 7 weeks. And so it didn't look particularly by the naked eye like a baby. But I would never forget the words she said. She said, see, it's nothing. It's just the size of a pea. And as a teenager, when you don't understand fetal development, you can see how that could be very deceptive, because what she's saying is there's no value in this baby.
Right.
Because she doesn't want to tell me that the baby already has a heartbeat. This baby has its own unique DNA. This baby does have worth. It's just she was devaluing the child based on their size and their location and the fact that they can't speak out for themselves.
Even back then, though, Toni, I mean, even though you were, you know, very young back then, when she looked at you and said, it's nothing, did you just internalize that as it's developmentally nothing, or did you feel it in some way that she was saying there's no value either?
I looked at it as, okay, it's not a baby.
Okay.
And it gave me momentary relief, in that moment.
And so suffice it to say, looking back, you can identify now that you were not given informed consent.
No, definitely not.
Yeah. So then what happened next after you after they kind of throttled you past the ultrasound portion?
Well, I went in to see the abortionist, and he told me that I was going to receive pills to end. He didn't say end. He said to, what was his exact words? He said this will end the pregnancy. And I didn't know they were the chemical abortion pills. I didn't know the RU46 pills. I didn't know that. All he did was hand me a Dixie cup of juice and plop 2 pills in there and said, here, drink this. This will end the pregnancy.
Did he go over any, I mean, this is obviously a procedure with drugs that you are taking. Did he go over the, full range of risks?
No, I do not recall him going over any of that. He did a pelvic exam first, which was highly uncomfortable because I had never even had gone to an OBGYN at this point of my life either. So that was my first experience of that, which was very uncomfortable. So right after that was when he gave me the Dixie cup of juice with the 2 pills. And then after that, he said, I'm going to give you another set of pills that you'll take in 24 to 48 hours. These are as far as his directions were. He said, you'll take these in 24 to 48 hours in the comfort of your home. And he said, you'll have a little cramping. It'll be kind of like a heavy period. And so he handed me a bag of that and walked me out.
And Toni...
Well, not walking, just let me go out the door with those.
And Toni, was that your experience? Was it just like a heavy period?
No, not even close to that. I took the first set of pills at my best friend's house, and nothing really happened. And they had given me 2 sets of them. So I ended up calling them and saying, I took the first set of pills like you told me to, and nothing really happened. And I was wondering if that was, normal. And I remember the lady on the other end, well, this is why we gave you 2 sets of pills. So just take the other set and you'll be fine, and just hung up.
Like hung up on your face in the follow-up?
Yeah, just like hung up. Like I didn't give me a chance to ask any other questions after that.
Oh, wow.
And so I was like, okay. So, I mean, I guess maybe because they already got my $400, they didn't really care. But I took the second set, and I did spot a little bit, but that was like the extent of it. And so I took it as, this is how uneducated I was. I took it as, oh, well, the nurse said it was just the size of a pea. So maybe that's all I'm going to really bleed. Like, maybe it's not going to be a lot. Now, I think that I was in denial, where I realized for like a month, I did get my period at one point, but I couldn't use tampons. And I thought it was just because of because I took those pills and my body was just like still needing to adjust. And so I was like, it was weird. Like I was like, oh, I can't use tampons. So I was just using a pad, but my period wasn't really the same. It was very light. And so about a month or so later, while I'm in school, I started getting these most excruciating pains throughout my entire body. It was like lightning bolts through my body, from like the top of my head to the bottom of my feet.
And this is in the middle of school, like in class?
This is in the middle of school. I'm in music class.
Oh, gosh.
And it just came on suddenly. And I remember thinking, okay, I got to get to the nurse's office. I don't feel good. I felt like I was going to throw up. I was just like, I can't even make it there by myself. I had to have someone in the class walk me to the nurse's office. And I'm basically kind of keeled over like can barely walk. And I'm feeling all this pressure below. And I go into the nurse's office. I just tell her, I was like, I have really horrible cramps and I just need to go in the bathroom. And so I go into the bathroom and there are blood clots the size of my fist.
Oh my gosh.
Leaving my body, like constant.
What are you thinking? What are you thinking at this time?
I'm kind of in shock. I'm like, what is happening? I feel so sick though that I'm like, and then in that moment, I'm thinking, oh, this is what was supposed to happen a month ago.
I think it's really interesting that you made almost an instantaneous connection because why would you even? Because because they told you it was going to be just like, a period, and yet you're passing these fist-sized blood clots. And so there's not that connection with the informed consent there to understand the parallel.
Right. Yeah, so I do remember that thought crossing my mind, and I also remember thinking, I want to go home, but I don't want to tell my mom why I need to go home. And so I lied and just told my mom I have bad cramps. I really need to just go home and go to bed. And she came and got me. And this was kind of normal because I did have bad cramps when I had my period. And so she thought this was probably normal. And I just remember going upstairs to my room and going from the bathroom to my bedroom for hours. Just bleeding and bleeding and bleeding. And the last thing I remember is, which I think is very ironic, I just remember like laying in fetal position in my bed.
Oh, gosh.
And just praying this was going to be over soon. And in the midst of this too, not only is this traumatic, but my boyfriend had broken up with me the day after he had brought me to the abortion clinic. So there's like, and I'm supposed to graduate, and I'm keeping this alive. So there's just all of this mentally unstable in all of this. And I'm going through this alone.
I can't even imagine the anguish because, as you've said before, you felt if you didn't get the abortion that he would leave you. And yet now here you are a month later in the midst of this chaos, like you said, and he's still gone.
Exactly. And I tell people all the time, abortion never solves what they say it's going to solve.
Yeah.
It's not empowering. It doesn't give you freedom. I remember when I left the abortion clinic, laying in the back seat of my best friend's car, and I remember silently crying because although I couldn't articulate it then, I knew something inside me changed. Like I knew I just did something permanent that I could never go back and change. And my best friend and my boyfriend had the audacity to carry on a conversation laughing as if nothing just happened.
I remember hearing from someone, and it really resonated with me, because I've had 2 unplanned pregnancies too, and it's kind of a similar situation to you with the friend and boyfriend. I remember them saying, those people in your life, they don't want the party to end. They don't want the person, the relationship that they have with you to stop. And it's almost as if they don't recognize that once you're pregnant with that child, life is different from here on out, whether there's an abortion or not.
Yes. Very correct. And they don't prepare you for that. They don't prepare you for the aftermath of just even reconciling the fact of understanding what I did. And, because although there was pressure, there's still, I think it's different when you take the abortion pills, because it's not like the abortionist is doing this to you. It's not like you're sedated and under, and they are killing the child. You're the one putting those pills in your system.
Right.
You know? And so the weight of that too is just daunting. And it feels so unforgivable that you would take the life of your own child under your own selfishness.
That's why I think your story and this podcast is so important, because so many women live in isolation, taking the complete onus on themselves and not recognizing that it was the abortion center that put those drugs in your hand, and it was all of these other pressures. They just don't even factor those in, and those have to be factored in.
Yes, and I completely agree with that. And I also agree with also taking ownership too of what I did, because I think that's when the true healing started to come as well. Like, I had to be honest with myself.
Yeah.
As well, that in those moments, I was not thinking primarily about this innocent child. I was thinking about myself, and I was listening to the wrong voices, which is why I try to, as much as I can, share the truth about this, because I don't want another girl to have to go through this and have to go through this type of healing in order to, you know, be whole, you know, because it took me a lot of years to heal from this. Not only to forgive those who were not truthful with me, but also the healing of my own responsibility too. So it kind of goes, you have to have almost a balance of both, if that makes sense.
Cuts both ways. Yeah, I understand that. Well, your story has a positive side to it, and a redemptive element to it, and forgiveness that not everybody's story gets to have. So can you share with us, just tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the guy that I had the abortion with, obviously our relationship ended, and I just never thought I would see him again. But I did go through post-abortion counseling and forgave him, you know, for not being the boyfriend that I needed during that time. And I had to walk through that knowing I would probably never get that from him. But I always say, you know, God is so good, and he goes above and beyond sometimes than we could ever think and imagine. And close to over 9 years, close to 10 years later, he actually did come back into my life to apologize to me. And it wasn't over the phone, it wasn't over social media, but he literally said, I want to meet you face to face because I have some things that I need to say to you. And
you didn't prompt him, right, Tony? Like, there wasn't anything that you...
Oh, gosh. No. He was not even on my radar. No offense. You know, it was a shock. I mean, he did find me through social media, and I got a random message from him, and it was like my mouth, like, dropped open.
Sure.
Like, that's how much we had not talked or communicated in years. And so obviously I was shocked. Obviously I also had my walls up too. Like you stinking broke my heart and left me years ago. And
so what was that reconciliation like then?
So the reconciliation was I met with him, and he said to me, the reason I left that relationship the way that I did was, to be honest, I didn't want to have to face the fact that we ended the life of our own child. And in that moment, I realized abortion doesn't just affect women. You know, I think it affects women on a different level because we're the one carrying that child. But for the man, what he said to me was basically, I didn't protect you or the child. And that's what I'm called to do. And I didn't do that. And so I think that's the weight on the man the responsibility of, he would say, I was childish. It was childish and immature of me to just leave you like that and just walk away without even telling you that's what I was going to do. Like, that was his plan all along. I want to make sure you have this abortion so I'm not stuck with you, in that sense. And so for him to humble himself after all of those years to come face to face with me and share that was humbling for me to hear as well, and took the forgiveness that I had already had for him to a whole other level. And long story short, less than a year later, I actually married him.
Oh, wow.
And we've been married for over 15 years now. And one of the most beautiful parts of our story is the fact that we were able to honor our preborn baby at our wedding. And we lit an extra candle to let our guests know what the meaning of that candle meant. And that we believe every time we share our story that children will be saved from this. And that our child is no longer a statistic, but that their voice is also being heard now in a different capacity every time we choose to be vulnerable and share the regret of the abortion. And so that's
Tony,
the redemptive side. Yeah.
It's a beautiful story, and one that I know so many people would long to have. How do I know you guys have other kids. How do your kids understand this story and understand their sibling?
Well, it's a journey. It's definitely a journey because, as you know, every child is different. They perceive things different. They take in things differently according to their personality. And for us, we've always been pretty open because of what we do, because I'm always speaking. So our children learned about our story very early. They're still pretty young right now. The oldest is 14. So it's shifting to a different, understanding for them. And that's what we expect. Like, we told them age appropriately, our story, but they're living around this, to me and my husband, we share our story with them and are open about what abortion is because we want them to have the understanding of it, but we also want them to have compassion on those who have gone through this. And they're going to be able to speak into that because of what their parents have gone through.
Yeah, and I think that's a big question that a lot of parents have, which is, I don't want to conceal I don't want to sanitize abortion for my kids. I want them to understand it. And especially with y'all's backstory, because there's different components to it. There's the pressure and the isolation and the abortion center pushing. So it's really encouraging to hear you say that you guys found a way to make age appropriate informational, offerings to the kids so they can understand.
Right. Yeah. And they have recently, and this was this year, all 4 of them came to hear us share our story at church. And so that was the first time they were present, and hearing it. And that was powerful too, because it was just them hearing other people's perspective and how it moved other people, because they were just standing there, like, listening to people come up to us afterwards and how it impacted them. And so I think I want them to be a part of that. Like, I want them to see that. And I want them to see, this is why we need a savior. We're broken and we need him. And so I plan also to share with my kids that we want them obviously to wait until they're married before they engage in any kind of sexual activity. But if for some reason that does happen and they end up getting pregnant or getting someone else pregnant, please know that you can come to us, regardless of me standing on these platforms and speaking on this. I don't ever want you to think that you have to run to the abortion clinic to hide from me.
Yeah.
Like, we will work through it. You know, this is what I want for your life, but if this happens, I still want you to come to me. I think that they need to hear that from their parents and not assume anything. I don't want them to make any kind of assumptions, because that's what I did when I was in that position.
I think that's a great reminder for everyone, for their kids, because you're right. That's, you know, that is the backstory to what you went through, and so many other people that I talk to, which is you're able to have, I mean, the abortion center is able to make themselves pretty much your primary confidant in a lot of these situations. And that's how they continue to profit off of that. Something else that you have spoken to at length, and you've been very bold about it, is the fact that these abortion centers and abortion activists really target minority and poorer communities and tell them, you can't survive without abortion. You can't thrive. I think one Vox headline, and there were lots of headlines that I saw when I was just looking through this, as you can imagine, but one of them sums it up pretty well by saying, quote, "Black women will suffer the most without Roe," end quote. What do you say? I mean, what do you say to people when they tell you this? I'm sure you've heard it.
Right out of the playbook of their founder, Margaret Sanger. Like, this was her whole target, was not only people who were not elite, but it was there has always been a target on the Black community, and to wipe us out. And it's still happening. Her legacy is still going forth, even though they try to, you know, take her name off of the building in New York and off the street name. They renamed it. You can't just rename stuff to disavow someone. You know, you need to change the fact that over 80% of Planned Parenthood's surgical abortion centers are in minority neighborhoods within walking distance. I would speak in the cities. In Philadelphia, there would be a high school and there'd be a Planned Parenthood right across from the high school.
I also saw, Tony, just something that stopped me in my tracks. It said more Black babies are aborted in New York City than even born.
And isn't it interesting that Planned Parenthood started in New York City? And so the ripple effect of this is so daunting.
You've said in a quote that I've read, it says, "Those who advocate for Black lives to matter and demand equal rights, that needs to start in the womb for Black babies." Why? And I know you've spoken out in opposition to Kamala Harris's all-trimester abortion on demand plan. Why have you decided to speak out against that this year and her on this issue?
Well, I've been speaking about it for years, you know, but I think it is also just so alarming that Kamala Harris, who's supposed to be a woman of color, will be pushing this to other Black women and in a guise of saying, "I care about you." It's a lie. Like, it's a flat out lie. And then to see a lot of the Black community standing in solidarity for the one who actually is trying to harm you is just insane to me. I don't understand the cognitive dissonance that's going on within even the Black church that are allowing abortion to be justified. It doesn't make sense to me, but yet Black lives matter. How are Black lives supposed to matter if they don't even matter in the womb?
And can we talk about that in the juxtaposition of the fact that New York is a great example, but in different states across the country, they're actively demonizing, attacking, or trying to close pregnancy centers, when we know this is based off of not just pro-life statistics, but general statistics that most women would have rather not aborted their child if they had had the emotional or financial resources. This is exactly what the Democrat Party has said for years, but no longer say out loud in the last 5 to 10 years, which is abortions are supposed to be unwanted and tragic, and women don't want them. So why all of a sudden is there a proactive push?
No longer safe, legal, and rare. That's not the rhetoric. Now it's just on demand anytime. this will have a continual ripple effect throughout the entire country. This is not about freedom. This is not about choice whatsoever, because I'm the one counseling these women who have gone through these things. And the last thing I would ever say is that they felt freedom in having that choice.
And don't you think there's an ultimate tragedy here, of course, for the child whose life is lost, but also the fact that most moms don't even want this. They're wanting resources, not abortions. Mm-hmm. And so could talk to us about the pregnancy centers and why that work is so important and should not be shut down.
Oh my goodness. The pregnancy resource centers, first of all, they outnumber the number of Planned Parenthoods. And so, but they don't get the taxpayer dollars like Planned Parenthood. But as I said earlier when we were speaking, the pregnancy resource centers, what they are doing is they get to be hope in the midst of this girl's crisis. And they get to speak life into her. And they're giving her not just saving the baby, but they're loving them both. They're loving this woman and saying, I know you're scared. I know things are unknown, but you are not alone in this. They're giving them diapers. They're giving them clothes. They're giving them parenting classes. They are helping them with their rent. I've had girls get cars so they can get to work. They're doing all the things that Planned Parenthood would never do. You call Planned Parenthood and you say, you know what, I'm going to choose to keep my baby. Do you have any resources for me? They're going to turn you around and say no. They're not it's not a choice at all. And so this is why we need these pregnancy resource centers. And this is why it's so important for us to be donating to our local pregnancy resource centers. They're not taking advantage of their vulnerability, and they don't have to pay for any of the things that they're giving to them. And so they're not gaining any financial gain from this woman's, circumstance. All they want to do is help her to see that life is worth saving and that she's worth it in the midst of it.
Well, Toni, we're closing out here, but I did want to ask you one last question. And that is, if you could speak to your younger self, if you could meet yourself in that moment, as that senior in high school who is isolated with the truth of that pregnancy, what would you want her to know and what would you say?
I would want her to know that I understand that she's scared. I understand that this was not the plan, but that life inside you is valuable, that you choosing life for this child might be difficult, but it's going to be 100% worth it. Because the other way, you can't go back and change it. And I have never, as I said before, I've counseled many women, and I've never heard a woman who's chosen life for her baby say, I wish I would have aborted. I've only heard women like myself say, I wish I can go back and give my child life in a heartbeat. I just would like to speak to those who may have a story like mine, that you can receive forgiveness for abortion, and there are a lot of resources out there. I don't want you to feel that this is something that you can never be forgiven for. And if you are in a situation that you are facing an unplanned pregnancy, please reach out to your local pregnancy resource center.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Emily.
Thanks for listening to the latest accounts from women across the country that face societal pressure to abort. Join us through this 3-part episodic series within a series as we hear more personal accounts in depth. Join us for our next episode as we speak to women who migrated to the U.S. and for which English was their second language, which plays a big role in the informed consent piece of being pressured into an abortion. From Exposed, Abortion in America, this is Under Pressure.